compost you buy in a bag, Ladybug's the best out there. Compost you buy by the truckload. I like the product that New Earth makes better than any of the others around here. But anyway, then take a bag or a bucket or whatever else and, make a mound of compost on top of the ground. If you use it in a bag, I use about 1/3 of a bag at a time. And then I'll take my hand and just kind of make like a little crater down on the top of a volcano. And then I water it. And every time I think about it I love to do this for 6 or 8 weeks before I plant. Every time I walk by, I'll go by and I'll fill up all my little craters of compost with the fertilizers and things like that. Now, any fertilizer out there, and I hope you use organic fertilizers, but any fertilizer, it takes a little while for the microbial life in the soil, principally the bacteria, to convert that fertilizer into something that plants can use. As one of my friends in the business says, plants don't eat, plants drink. It's not entirely true. We found they actually take in some little tiny particles. But before the plant can benefit from the fertilizer that you're putting down, it has to go through this digesting process, and it's your microbes in the soil that are what are doing that digesting. So if you start 4 or 6 or 8 weeks early or 2 months early, what you're doing is giving that fertilizer time to be converted into something that plants can really absorb and use. Does the fertilizer wash away? Well, if you use Jerry Parsons' favorite fertilizers like ammonium sulfate, yes. There is nothing to bind them to the soil, and chances are they're going to be washed away and gone. And again, it's semi-technical, but I want to give you the explanation. Our soils are full of clay particles. Those clay particles bear a negative charge. And everybody remembers, hopefully, from your early science or chemistry days or whatever else, that like charges repel. If you take a magnet and you try to push the two positive ends together, they push apart. But if you turn the positive to the negative end, they lock together and hold themselves together. Okay, we've got all these negative charges in the soil. If we dump on chemical fertilizers, we're putting on principally nitrates, nitrites, and phosphates. These things have a strong negative charge. So when we're dumping a negatively charged fertilizer particle on top of negatively charged soil, what happens? First rain, it washes away and it's gone. Fertilizers you put on your yard or anywhere else, if you're using chemical stuff, probably 85% of it washes away. That's a big loss to you, that's a big loss to the plants, and you're polluting our rivers and streams and aquifers in Mexico. The delta outside of where the Mississippi enters into the Gulf of Mexico, they call nowadays the dead zone. There's an area bigger than several New England states where there's no life. There are no crabs, there are no oysters, there are no clams, there are no fish, there are no anything. As a result of all the chemical fertilizers and other things that are washing, mainly fertilizers, worse than pesticides, stuff that's washing down the river and out into the Gulf. No chemical fertilizers. Okay, what happens with organic fertilizers? Well, organic fertilizers, your nitrogen and things, are mainly in what we call an ammoniacal form. All you chemists out there know that that radical has a positive charge to it. So we're dumping positively charged fertilizer molecules on top of negatively charged soil. What happens? That fertilizer sits there and waits for the plant to be ready to use it. Now, plants have a real neat little mechanism by which it's called the hydrogen ion, just a stronger positive charge. They break the fertilizer free from the soil particle and absorb it and use it. So when you are using organic fertilizers, there's nothing wrong with having your fertilizer out there a month or 2 or even 3 months early. Again, if you listen to the people, the Extension Service and all right now, they're getting ready to tell you about fertilizing their yard. And you're not supposed to put your fertilizer out till the second full moon after the 3rd day of the 4th month. All this BS about when you can put your fertilizer out. When you use organic fertilizer, you use it when it's convenient to you. And so, if you really want to have, I think, the very best effects, you start early. You create these little mounds of compost. You water every time you go by. The way that I learned this was several years ago. I had some fruit trees to plant. This was in the fall, and I knew I wouldn't get into my fruit trees until January. But that soil was so hard, it was just a clay, and I couldn't break it with a digging bar. But I went out, got a load of compost. I put like 3 wheelbarrows everywhere I was going to plant a fruit tree. And I watered it periodically through the winter. It was a very dry winter. We didn't get any rain to speak of. Next January, when I got the fruit trees, I went out and I could dig that soil with a teaspoon. It was so soft. So I started doing this in my vegetable garden. And let me tell you what, it makes all the difference. I see the tomato queen is not here today. I think Sylvia's on a cruise or something. But the people that try this come back showing us pictures and bringing tomatoes and things like that. I'll give you one word of warning. I'm sneaky. I learned this years ago when I worked with Alton Grimm. People come in with this big, beautiful, luscious fruit, and I know all they intended to do was bring it in and show it off. But I learned you had to look at them and say, oh, you shouldn't have. And then they feel obligated to leave it with you. Well, I don't get a lot of good presents. So I want to see this stuff, but you might not get to leave with it. Yes, sir?
You didn't mention using green sand.
Green sand is a great iron source, and I'm glad you brought it up, Bill. It's, green sand is a great natural iron source, and it's a good, inexpensive source of iron and zinc and a couple of other things. Volume-wise, I usually end up using the micronutrients. Just guys can use a fifth as much and still get the same results. But nothing all wrong with green sand. If you want to dump a cup or two of green sand on there at the same time, you certainly can. Now, I'll tell you about one other thing that you may or may not want to add. And it's strictly up to you. It's not hocus pocus. It really does have kind of a scientific basis to it. And if you listen to Malcolm, he's going to tell you a lot about this, Malcolm Beck. And he will tell you to put something that we call paramagnetic rock around it as well. Rocks that have paramagnetic qualities is like a very low level of magnetism, and it exists. It's measurable. They have a meter that you can actually measure the amount of paramagnetism. But rock material that is of igneous origin, that originated in volcanoes, tends to have this charge to it that we call paramagnetism. And it will be in lava sands, it will be in basaltic sands, things like that. Malcolm makes a blend at Gardenville they call vulcanite, like volcano, vulcanite. I tend to just usually use just, good lava sand because it's cheaper and pretty easy to come by. But one thing that this seems to do is it increases the sugar buildup in the plant, which makes a plant more cold hardy. I'm going to tell you another way to do that in just a minute. But the more sugars that you have in the sap of a plant, the lower the temperature can go before you have to worry about the plant freezing. And, if you're like me growing up, you probably made popsicles in the freezer. If you put too much sugar in the popsicle, they never froze. It's, sugar's an electrolyte. Sugar's antifreeze. And so if you can increase the sugar content of the sap of your plants, they'll go several degrees cooler before they freeze. Malcolm did this with his paramagnetic rock when he planted early one spring. Had a late freeze. All his wife's tomatoes froze, and everybody in the neighborhoods, their tomatoes froze. And Malcolm's plant sat there and grew, according to Malcolm, without encouragement whatsoever. I agree. There's a former county extension agent who's worked with Malcolm for a long time who said Malcolm tends to see the results he hopes to see in his garden. So that's why he got somebody independent to look at a lot of things. But it has proven to be somewhat effective in making plants more cold hardy. How often do you have to do it? About once every 100 years is enough. So if you're putting a paramagnetic material in, whatever it is, you probably only have to do it once as long as you're continuing to plant in the same area. And how much? Maybe a cup or two. Pretty cheap insurance. Try it and let me know how it works out for you. While we're on the subject of freezing, the other thing that you can do, and I'm going to talk more about this later, is seaweed. Liquid seaweed does exactly the same sort of thing. Liquid seaweed builds the sugar content of the sap and makes your plants more cold hardy. If you spray every couple of weeks with liquid seaweed, your plants can get about 5 or 6 degrees colder before they'll freeze. If you have a plant that normally freezes at 32, it'll go to 26 or 27 before it freezes. So that's the other thing. Spray with this regularly when you first put it out. It also totally stops spider mites. We'll talk about that in just a second. But anyway, that's the way I get ready for planting tomatoes and peppers and eggplants. And then when you go to plant, you just dig the hole a little deeper. At the time you plant, there's one other thing that I consider to be very, very crucial. And that is this stuff.